good to invite you all and welcome you all to this GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe, as we're going to be talking about I to we, and particularly a really exciting event that's coming up in May, Set in Motion. A couple of key people that are working on plans for that, John Blake and Marc Baugh, and I'm going to ask you guys to kind of help steer the conversation, particularly. John, I know you've got to bow out in about 25 minutes or so. And so I want to be sure that we squeeze all the juice we can out of you before you leave. Talking about GRIP-Birkman Coaches, Set in Motion, the whole general concept of I to we, and why now, why this is important. Man, I got a lot of why questions that you could answer.
We're going to hand those ones to Mark. No, good to be here this morning, and actually just came off of a really exciting couple of days in St. Louis, where I had the opportunity to really engage and talk about I to we, and what not from an organizational perspective, but what does it mean for us? And a couple of things that stood out from that I think are relevant for this conversation. And I think the one that I'll say surprised me, and it never should, but the one that surprised me is that the idea of pushing through to the we it's not natural in our churches. The idea of us pushing through an I value to get to a true we experience, that's not normal. So let me give the example. So we talk about the foundational item principle or posture being that of abiding, and that has to be settled. And as we began to talk through it, and as we began to have conversations, the idea of my personal relationship being a connector, the idea of that being something that we do together in a we, that corporate worship is beyond Sunday mornings and it's beyond small group, that it actually is a water cooler conversation. It is sort of a triad conversation. It is a staff meeting and logistics component. It's in all of that. Kind of messed with them a little bit. Kind of left them wondering, how do you, I never thought of it as being integrated into that. And it was just an interesting opportunity to then unpack that and say, well, what would happen if, one of the statements that we asked them about was, I openly ask and share how I'm doing in my personal walk, or I ask others how they're growing in Jesus. And it just a Likert scale of, how are we doing? And this was one of the ones that essentially they were saying, no, not so much. They had a set time in their staff meeting. They had Sunday morning, but that incorporation. And so to get to unpack, well, why not? And what would the impact be if we did that? And how might we incorporate more of that into our DNA, into what we believe to be foundational? How might we live that out differently? And that conversation then really allowed them not just to understand some of the underlying, some of the fear, I've been hurt, I've been burned, sort of conversation, but it also then led to a practical of, well, here are things that I can do, here are things that we can do, and here's then things that we believe if we were to do this, then that the church would see as well. And if you want to understand, or as we think about Set in Motion and what is the value potentially of Set in Motion, it's that we get to think about those things together. And we don't get to think about them in the context of one team or of one church, but we get to think about them in the context of what's foundational, what transcends organization or country or mission or church or parachurch, what really becomes some of these things that we can learn from each other and that we can invest together in. And so I think, Set in Motion, really, we're not calling it a conference, we're not calling it a workshop, we're calling it a gathering, because really we want there to be some learning, we want there to be some experiential items in it, and we want there then to be workshops. We want to be talking about the application of it. So that's sort of my quick initial snapshot on where I'm at, and I'm still pretty jazzed from what I got to experience and see the power of us getting beyond the I conversations and the I values to really um, deciding where, what we're willing to lean into in a we sort of environment and a we sort of conversation.
So John, we've had user group type meetings with GRIP-Birkman community. We've had some training type meetings, update sessions. How is this meeting really going to be different from those?
Fundamentally, GRIP-Birkman is an assessment. What held us together has always been the principles or the ideas, but it's always been centered around an assessment component of, hey, how can we continue to use this assessment in valuable ways that will help us highlight the principles, that will help us highlight the framing. And what we're doing is we're flipping that and we're saying, no, at the core, this conversation is about the principles. It's about how we move from I to we, and whether or not it's GRIP-Birkman that's an assessment that helps us get there, or whether it's just a separate tool that might help us do this. Debbie's on the call right now. Some of the things that they're able to do inside of Wycliffe right now, as far as those shared experiences that they're able to create, as far as some of the different things that we can pull that aren't assessment driven, but that allow us to reinforce or push toward those principles, is really what's going to be driving the conversation. So I think that shift is going to be significant. And the second thing for us as a community is that in some ways it's kind of been an exclusive group, right? You're either a GRIP-Birkman coach or trainer, and that's why you're being invited into that. And we want to really open up the conversation. So whether you're a GRIP-Birkman coach or trainer for this event isn't really relevant. We want people that are in senior pastor roles. We want people that are in training and development. We want people that are in that are in youth ministry. We want those that are on the field. We want those that are in their home office for a sending organization, because we're all coming at it from slightly different approaches, but the unifying factor of what's going to draw people ultimately to the event is that we want to see unity in the body of Christ. And there's things that right now make that a really relevant conversation in our world.
So there'll be other people there who are not GRIP-Birkman coaches, and it will not be exclusively focused on GRIP-Birkman. Then why specifically do we want to have GRIP-Birkman coaches there? I mean, it's more than just advertising this right now to GRIP-Birkman coaches and trying to get a base of people there, right?
Yeah, for sure. In some ways, if you've been through the GRIP-Birkman coaches training, at least a half of your first day, if not your full first day, was solely centered around the principles, was solely centered around these concepts that really undergird and that really connect our community. And so part of it is that there's a power in us coming together around some of these things that we believe. We believe that spiritual gifts are one of the ways that God chooses to unify us, because he gave us strengths and weaknesses supernaturally, and those become connectors. I want that to be part of the conversation, and nobody gets that better than a GRIP-Birkman coach or trainer, because that's ultimately what we've been working toward. I want people that really have a shared language and ability to sort of talk through things like underlying needs and stress behavior in a way that can give some others language for some of these things that they may have seen or experienced, but they haven't known how to articulate it. I think one of the values anytime that we come together, and one of the values of the GRIP-Birkman community, is that we do have a shared language around some of these things. IDWE's going to push that a little bit, but for us to have that common platform, even among I don't know, it could be a third of us or half of us or 70%. I don't know what the ratio will be as far as those that have been GRIP-Birkman trained to those who have not. But even for us to be able to encourage others and to help them understand in that way, I think will be really important. And I think it will enhance GRIP-Birkman coaching. Frankly, I think it will allow us as GRIP-Birkman coaches to make sure that we're really clear on the principles and see when GRIP-Birkman fits and when it doesn't fit, and have more of a freedom to not feel dependent on the tool, but to really trust the fact that the principles can guide the conversation in a really unique way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a couple of the people that I've invited. One's a lawyer, one is an executive with a large automobile company, and they are both very active laymen in our church. They are not ministers. They are not GRIP-Birkman coaches, but they're some of those people that when I've talked to them about the concept of I to we, you can see their eyes lighting up. You can see them kind of leaning into the conversation. And so when I said to them, hey, we're having this gathering, and it was like, oh, tell me more about it. And I said, well, I'm telling you about it because I want to invite you to come. And, neither of them said, oh, no, I don't think that's something I ought to do. Both of them, said, yeah, let me think about that. Let me pray about that. Yeah, I might be interested in that. And we're in conversation right now. So there may be some people like that who will be here who are very much interested in the concept of I to we and want to learn more about what are those principles? How do we get from I to we? So Marc Baugh, you've been working a lot on the schedule with this. And you've been on a couple of the task forces also that have been building some of these tools that we talk about that we're going to be training to for those that are coming to the early train. Talk to us about the schedule and talk to us about it in terms of what we're going to come away with after this meeting.
Great. I think I'd like to start with how we need to enter it. I think one thing that's interesting about Set in Motion to me is the posture in which we arrive will be different than any other retreat, camp, conference thing we've done. At least for me, I see it as not a place necessarily to go learn or to go compare, but to go live in Christian community together for a little bit of a time and to practice this idea of I to we in the 48 hours we're going to be there. So to me, the posturing going into it is going to be a challenge because it's different than every other thing I've done. And so with that being said, the goal for me, I guess, coming out would be that people leave with a renewed sense of that settled significance, that we don't have to keep climbing a ladder. We don't have to keep pushing forward. We are significant because of the blood of Jesus, and that we feel refined. I think a lot of times in the worlds that we're all in, we keep collecting other people's baggage or even our own baggage as we move through our lives and our years. And hopefully the way the schedule is set, we will come away with, we're going to leave some of those things behind and go, okay, that's not that important. I thought this was, but this is actually not helping me abide. This is actually trying to achieve and not thrive, and being able to define some of those things so that we can leave with a renewed and refined sense of purpose. But there are three main things we try to do in retreats. One is large group togetherness. One is small group togetherness, and the last thing is some good free time.
So coming away with that sense of perhaps a renewed, you said something about a renewed sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. I'd like for you to unpack that one a little bit more, Marc.
Yeah, I think, like at least in my world, I'm in youth ministry full time, and I get burdened with the baggage of programming or the baggage of here's what we have to do, here's how it has to go. And it pushes me to that I value. It pushes me to that success driven, that achievement side. It pushes me toward that term we use in other areas, a solo heroic leader, where I've got to get it all done. And hopefully we'll come away with the idea that I need people around me. And as GRIP-Birkman coaches, we know that. But are we doing it? Are we striving to live into the we value? So that refined sense of, I don't need these things I think I need. I need to refocus on this community aspect, this I to we process.
Right. So John, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think there's something there, and I think that beyond that, that renewing of the purpose, I think for some of us, it's also going to be identifying some potential blind spots and what do we do with it, right?
Mhm.
What do we do with that? Another sort of takeaway as I've been introducing, multiple people as I'm inviting them in off the weekend, different things like that, is this idea that that there is a shared value that's uncomfortable. And one of the ideas that really was highlighted is this idea that when we get to the we value, me leaning into something, I'll use this idea of caring. See, we think about this idea of in caring, there could be some grieving and some the hurt that's real in that space. And the shared value there, right, is the idea of shared brokenness, right? It's that idea that I can hold you where you're at without trying to fix it, and I'm willing to open my brokenness to you, and you're willing to open your brokenness to me. And it was interesting because the conversation even that we had, and these are the types of things that I think we'll find our language just taking a little shift, but it's truly pivotal, was, well, in the grieving process, you allow that person, the person who's grieving, to guide the process. And I said, yes. And there are times where we're going to be called to share and to grieve together when I, as the griever, would rather not. I would rather do that personally, but for the sake of the we, for the sake of our unity, I'm going to choose to grieve and to share that with you because there's something that happens when I do that. And to be able to call that out in that group and say, okay, what is it that I might be doing that I might think, well, that brokenness is I'm the one that's being cared for, but what's my responsibility to the we as we're thinking about that? What does that look like? And what do I do with that? Because that goes against sort of this, I take care of myself first and then I can bring my whole self to the group. Well, how do I bring my broken self into the group? Because you need the broken me and not the whole me. And so those, it messes with the way that we think. It messes with the way that we sometimes approach healing and wholeness and complete, all those sort of things, and that really at the core are kind of I values. And it really pushes us into a we space that forces us into shared brokenness, into interdependence, and into a vulnerability that frankly isn't comfortable at times, that I'd rather not lean into that at times, but I choose to for the sake of the body. And this is one where I've never seen it modeled or shared in the same way that Paul has in his life for me personally, as a mentor and as a friend, but for our community. That idea of I'm choosing to share the pain with you, not because I like the pain, but because there's something that happens when I choose to do that. And so how we choose, how we talk about that is one of the things that we'll unpack in Set in Motion. How we look at the why behind some of these things and really see what's the kingdom value that can be highlighted as we talk about it and as we work toward it.
Guys, what you're talking about here, though, a team has to be healthy in order to be able to do that, right? I mean, there has to be, you've got to work some, not just on the abiding together, you've got to work on the thriving part of it too, where the team is building health, or that can become an unhealthy situation, right?
For sure. But let's even take thriving, for example, right? How our culture today will tell you that thriving, that idea of wellness, that's done through self-care.
Right.
I love self-care. I will be as big a proponent as any person out there, but that is not the end goal. And the solution to burnout is not sabbatical. And we've bought into that. We've bought into the idea that you burn yourself out and then you go and you heal and then you come back and you do more ministry. I don't see it. I don't see that as being an ongoing, long-term right way of doing it. Instead, as a community, we have to help each other learn how to have a collective strength. That means that I get to help speak into your boundaries and how you're doing that, and I get to live into the accountability and into that relationship of what wellness is. And as a team, we get to talk about things that are life-giving and things that are life-draining, so that we don't get our 65-35 out of whack, so that we're not over time just burning each other out, but rather we're actually in spaces and in teams that care about those things along the way. Everything from what food we're bringing to potlucks to how much we're expecting of each other after hours and before hours. All those things come into this idea of thriving, which is not a self-care moment. It's a team. It's a we decision that we make to lean in and to care and to be willing to open ourselves into a black box of conversations around, Mark, I need to tell you, I've gained some weight, buddy. And emotionally right now, I'm struggling because there's too many plates spinning and I don't know what to do with it. And so those are, again, those are the types of things that I think we need to have conversations around. I think we need to discuss what that means and how do we do that in a missions organization? How do we do that in a local church? How do we do that in parachurch? And how do we do that if I'm a Christian leader that's leading, a hospital and trying to figure out how I can care well for my team that's saying 90 or 80% of them feel burned out and they're looking for new jobs right now?
John, as you're talking, one of the things that came to mind is probably a shared experience among all of us is we go from that thriving, we want that value of self-care, but we go from that to brokenness. We go from burnout to the shared brokenness. So our shared brokenness a lot of times is actually around burnout. And so what would happen if we could avoid that burnout by supporting each other and keeping ourselves in community and covenant with each other? What kind of actual brokenness would be revealed, and how could Jesus move through that to create a unity in the body of Christ where he gets the glory and not just around our labor and our tiredness and our burnout?
Wow, that's some heavy stuff, guys. John, real quick, I know you've got to go, but tell me before you leave what for you would be a measure of success for Set in Motion. How will we know if this was a successful event?
I think two things. One is a renewed sense of passion and commitment that we is really the way that God designed it, that John 17, that Jesus will be revealed, that he will be known, not because of what we do, but because of how we live in unity. I just hope that there's a sense around that just surprises us. The second thing is, I hope that as people walk away from the event, that there's an ability to understand just the model enough, not all the nuances of it, but just to understand the model of how an I value can become a midpoint and not a final destination as we're engaging in teams. That really we can collectively begin to look and say, oh man, that's really good. Is that the we value or is that the I value that we've put at sort of the target there, so that we can sort of have a shared language around that model, and ultimately that people that are leaving feel that there's that they practically have met some people that can encourage them on their journey, and that they have taken away some tools or some resources that can very practically help them as they're actually moving forward. So those would be the main things that I'm hoping people can enjoy and take away in that event.
Great. I'm going to open up the mics in just a few minutes. I'm going to give a couple of people with high thought scores a couple of moments to think about this, about questions that you might have or comments you might want to make to it. But Mark, before we open up the mics, one more thing from you about just the plan in general and how you see us going forward from this with the I to We movement that's really begun.
That's a really big question. My dream.
I'm glad you gave that one to Mark.
Yeah, it's probably a John question.
It is, but I want to hear it from your perspective.
My heart and I guess my vision would be that we're beginning to create a community that lives together in the we value, that we may be in different locations all across the world, but we know that we have each other for shared brokenness. We know that we can champion each other's successes. We know that we can abide and thrive together. We can care and connect and all the things that we don't necessarily get as being scattered, connected loosely with different organizations and different groups. So one of my big goals and big dreams would be that if you're struggling with something or something's happening in your local context, your local culture, that somebody at this weekend or even on the call today that I need to call that person. I need to reach out to that person. I need to check on them. Or I need to share them something that's going on in my life so that we can build community together. And so I just envision these pockets of people, even regionally or globally or however, they're just connected in Christ revealing community.
I hear you. Paul Ford, I see you've already unmuted. Yeah, I know you've got a comment or a question or something to say.
I think the Set in Motion event was highlighted. I just got back from an overseas trip, and on the Paris to Boston leg home, I was standing in line, and we got held up on the jetway and started talking to a guy. It turned out he was the CFO of a major pharmaceutical company, and in a 15-minute conversation with him, and 6 days before that, on the other end of going, I'd had a conversation. I guess I sit in great places in airplanes with the chief information officer of FedEx, and in both conversations, well, I'll call it addressing the disease of I. In both situations, talking about the nature of individualism, its growing impact, and both of them, I've got phone calls set up with both of them, initiated by them, not by me, wanting to understand specific ways and means to address process away from individualism toward team. And it was absolutely profound. I was really wise. I thought in my mind, well, I was going, what would Ken Damari say? I tried to focus on that. What would Ken say in this? And that was really helpful to me. Because Ken's a great big picture guy and challenging these kinds of crazy people. So it was very moving. And my point is, it's very confirming. It was incredibly confirming of the call that you all are responding to and leading us out in this event and Set in Motion to really begin to not provide a meaningful assessment process, but to actively pursue ways and means and exercises and processes that address a cultural phenomenon that's breaking the West. And so, anyway, I'm just amazed at God's timing and leading you all as a leadership team toward this event. And so, thank you, as one who's jet lagged but excited.
And you've been a pioneer in leading us out in this too, Paul, even with the assessments that you've helped to develop in the combining of GRIP and Birkman together, going back to the need that was being addressed when these assessments came into being or came to our attention. So that's great. Yeah, and a couple of years ago, we were in a team build, and about halfway through that team build, as we were working on the GRIP and talking about team styles and bodybuilding roles and the whole concept of moving from I to we. And this one lady said, the problem is we have a pronoun problem. We have a pronoun problem. And I think, Debbie Miller, I think I heard you say that exact same thing at one of our gatherings a couple of years ago in Dallas. I'm pretty sure it was you, Debbie, that said that. We have a pronoun problem. And it's not, we're hearing a lot in our social media now and in the news about a pronoun problem, but they don't have it right. The pronoun problem that we have is not the one they're talking about. The pronoun problem we have is the problem of moving from I to we. Our whole society and all those values that we talk about, societal, cultural values, are focused on the I. And we have a new biblical value, a set of biblical values that move us more toward the we. It's interesting to me how Jesus, when he was asked what's the greatest commandment, he gave the right answer that they were expecting, probably, with, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, everything that you got. But they probably didn't expect him to add to it, and the second one, and he would not extricate the second value, the second commandment, from the first one, the second one being that you love your neighbor as yourself. The fact that he put those two so closely together emphasizes to me that we need Jesus and we need each other. And how do we get to that? Assessments can help us, but we need more than just assessments. We need to really be talking about a whole different way of thinking. And that's part of what we're going to be trying to do with this. So with that, let me ask you if you want to open up your mics. There are a couple of members of the leadership team here on the call. You might want to add some things that haven't been said, or you might have some other questions about it. This is a great time for you just to open up your mics and join right in, please. And remember, I'm not afraid of silence.
Let me add one more thing, and then I'll shut up. The trip was working with a training team that oversees a group of missionaries in Central Asia, and we did a 3-day team build, and then we did a day with the team where we said, okay, what are the applications for the rest of your training? What are the implications for I to we thinking and acting and steward leadership? How it affects the way your leaders lead, and then the 5th day, I spent a day with the leader, and the dominating conversation with the leader, and this is a significant ministry organization of impact, probably not dissimilar to yours, Mark McGowan, and the discussion really centered on how do we train our team leaders to steward I to we process. And I think that's one of the other things that I'm really excited about that I hope Set in Motion will address. It's really gets down to how leaders lead and where their buy-in on top down versus shared process, and what we call often body life leadership. And we have a means in the company in this setting, a team leader process and some team leader functions that we actually are going to tie to gifting and team styles to enable ways actively for the leader to share leadership intentionally by strengths and weakness, by powerful gift and by weakness, what John mentioned earlier about both the strengths and the weaknesses. And so I was really excited. We're actually beginning a process out from that event to begin to delineate, and some of you will be actually be getting an email from me, of taking these 7 functions and tying them to directly which gifts fit which functions, which team styles fit. And so I say all that to highlight one of the other realities that I hope we address meaningfully in Set in Motion is that how the team leader leads related to steward leadership or I to we process is as strategic as it's ever been. And because so many teams are breaking down for primarily individualistic reasons or sin brokenness, we have a tremendous window of opportunity, I think, there as well. So anyway, I'm obviously pretty jazzed about it, so I'll stop.
Yeah, Corey.
Hi, Larry. I guess the newest kid on the block here. I'm a new graduate from the coaches training last week. It was wonderful with Wes, and I am the founding president of an equipping evangelism ministry in London, Ontario, Canada. So I'm coming at this a little bit of a different angle. Just I'll kind of build the scaffold, and you guys can fill it in. So I do a lot of leadership training. I'm a pastor for a long time, 17 years as a pastor. I'll be in Victoria, BC this month. with a church out there. And we talk a lot about the gospel and the gifts for the glory of God, kind of being a church on mission. And that's our framework. Share the gospel, share the gifts for the glory of God. And so one of the illustrations we use a lot, or I use a lot in leadership training, is sort of the picture of a warship. I mean, I think when we all picture sort of a World War II warship, you picture sort of the missionary on the boat, they're the ones with the gun on their side and they're waving, and the rest of the people are, they're throwing flowers and they're teary because the heroes are going off to war. And that's sort of like the church and the missionary, or the church and the evangelist, even the church and the pastor. I think there's sort of the real missionaries, and then there's everybody else. And we kind of try to bust that up a little bit by saying, I think everyone's on the ship serving in different capacities, but there's a principle called soldiers first, whereby you need to steward your gun. I mean, my dad was military, and he would tell me that no matter where you serve in the military, you've got to be able to handle your rifle. I mean, you're soldier first. And I think that's the gospel. I think we're all called to share the gospel. But all that to say that that I think one of the ways I've seen the I to we, which is what the GRIP language is, Paul's language is, really kind of be a bit of an aha moment, is when we actually turn the church from the inside to the outside and we talk about Christian mission. Because I think we've had sort of a mentality that it's me and Jesus in the West, and it's sort of, evangelism feels like a bit of a solo act for people. I do everything else. I worship together. I pray together. I study the Bible together. I do fellowship together. But I'm on my own in evangelism, and I don't think that's the early church at all. And so my question in asking all that might be, maybe this is a question for Mark. I mean, he's in youth ministry. I was a youth pastor for a lot of years too. Is how you might sort of articulate the missional objectives, because I just find when we love one another in the church, in worship of Christ, that becomes the template for loving our neighbor together in witness of Christ. That's kind of what we try to do with churches, is think through. We gather together to go together. We don't gather together to go alone. We gather together. So I just wonder if missionally, if there's any sort of any sort of checkpoints for how this set in motion training might impact going together, not just gathering. Maybe that's a nebulous question. If it's out of order, move on. No problem. But
yeah. No, I think it's a great question. I think the premise of it is love calls us to action, right? And so we have to be moved forward in a process, but the moving forward isn't the means to an end. It is the ends of itself. This process of I to we is the means to the ends of the going, right? So you'll see the third block is accomplishing, and the shared result is that measurable results in meaningful work. Not just measurable results in work, but measurable results in meaningful work. And so to Westernize it would be not just numbers, in seats or nickels and noses, but people are joining in the community, and they're onboarding in this I2We process, and they're creating communities around where they are. And you see that exponential evangelism start to kind of develop. I think just like you're saying, and Dr. Ford said, that leadership is a theological statement. The way we lead is a theological statement. It's not a task we do, but it presents the gospel in certain ways. And I think if that happens, and we learn to lead with grace and mercy and through spiritual gifting, then we bring people on a team in missional aspect. Like, as we evangelize, we can start to recognize what God's doing in their lives and start to acknowledge that. And hey, here's why we need the community. You're looking for community here at your job. You're looking for community in the bars, in the wherever it may be, on the golf course, wherever it may be. You're finding this we value. What if you found that we value in Christian community? And what if there's a greater, I dare say, eternal significance to a we value in Christian community? And so I think that's how you translate this to the evangelism side, is that we are called to do meaningful work, and how we define meaningful and push it forward that way. I don't know if that was helpful or not.
I want to speak to that too from an historical perspective in our movement. The whole reason that I felt called to start this process was for purposes of body evangelism. I'm in this for body evangelism. We've made, to your point exactly, Corey, we've made the reality of evangelism into I think Peter Wagner was the first one that coined the phrase 10% of us are evangelists, and we really expect them to do all the heavy lifting. But body evangelism, if everybody does indeed have powerful spiritual gifts, the two primary activities of the Holy Spirit in the New Testament were to empower gifting, and no better way to love and serve unbelievers than through the power of the Spirit, through our gifts, individually and collectively. And then secondly, the second primary activity of the Holy Spirit is to empower character, fruit of the Spirit. And that's the love side. So if we've got the power in action, serving side, and the love side, the community that Mark just so eloquently stated, we're on the road to effective evangelism that's body driven, and where people with gifts of hospitality understand that they're the second most important gift to evangelism. And what I learned, that as an exhorter, I'm a poor person's evangelist. And so all those pieces drive us to an evangelistic model, that ultimately this is about releasing the body to the world, which is exactly where your heart is. And so I'm excited that, and it's nice to see you from last week and meeting you there with your group. I think God, I'm not surprised that God has called you to us at a time like this, because I think you may help us, as the way our community works is someone like you with a heart and a passion and gifting for evangelism will help us implicate this into body life language. So we look forward to your affecting us.
Thanks, guys. Very helpful. Appreciate that.
I think, Corey, one thing that you bring to my mind is that we have to keep emphasizing that God gave the gifts to the body, and we are all interconnected. And that's one of the biggest things for me, that bodybuilding roles, Paul, and the whole concept of the gifts triangle helped me to really understand for the first time, really, that I didn't have to feel guilty that I wasn't bringing in as much fruit as the evangelists were. I was not a fruit picker, but I realized I was a fruit developer. I could help to grow the fruit. I could be part of it. And, there were other people that were going to be the diggers of the ground before the seed was even planted. And they were not going to get to pick the fruit, but they had a part in harvesting it. They had a part in creating it. And so, when I came to realize that we all do have a part in this, that it is the body working together to gather fruit, and that we can affirm those other people that are in the background, those people that have those supporting gifts, we can affirm them as part of the we, because the concept that we really have is that when we gather together as a bunch of I's, that's us. Well, we is more than just the gathering together of a bunch of I's. We're not just all gathering together with each of us having our individual calling, our individual gifts, our individual desires, our individual interests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We really have to look at who are we as a body and what's our role in that. So I think what you've brought up there, Corey, really, really does help to emphasize that.
Yeah, I love Blake's John 17 reference. It's kind of one of our staple passages as well. And in a simplistic sense, it's so fascinating that, you could sort of illustrate that. Like, when we had 2 or 3 people waiting on the Zoom call, had those people been using their gifts actively in the church, the more people we add to that picture, if evangelism in a simple sense is showing and sharing Jesus, then we look more like Christ together when we use our spiritual gifts, because he is all those things. And so we try to help churches understand we are at a significant loss if you're not using your gift. It's not just that you get to use your gift because it makes you feel good, though it should bring you pleasure and joy to do that. But we are worse off if you're not the foot, if you're not we ever want to esteem the voice, because faith comes from hearing. I get that. But what a picture emerges when a church is using the gifts and then articulate the gospel to make sense of who Jesus is. It's really quite beautiful. But anyway, I don't want to hog all the conversation, but but you're bringing up super helpful.
Yeah, and you're bringing up some really, really good things there. I need to write that down, because we really do look more like Christ together. Wasn't it when they looked and saw how they loved one another that they first called them Christians?
In Antioch, yeah, absolutely true.
So
It's a beautiful, it's just a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Corey, we want you to work up a little bit of emotion too. I think it'd be really cool if you added some.
Yeah, you and I, Paul, we could probably float a small boat, hey, with our passion.
One comment I was going to make is just, and I think I've said, I can't remember the context I said this, but really what we're working towards is cultural change.
Oh yeah,
because we have a culture of I, and even getting together on the golf course, it's still about I. Who can hit the ball the furthest? Who can get the lowest score? Who can pay for the drinks in the clubhouse afterwards, kind of thing, because of it's all those kind of things. So we're really about changing culture. And I think that's one of the things we really got to consider in this is how do we go about changing culture? What are our current beliefs about who we are and that are false beliefs, especially in the eyes of God? What are those beliefs that we've taken on from our culture that we need to really change? And I think one of the processes that we did in YWAM for a project we're working on was working on culture change corporately. And it's part of it was identifying the current beliefs we have that are wrong beliefs, and identifying the beliefs that are God's beliefs that we need to replace those beliefs with. And I know in our context with what we were working on, it had a significant impact in the way we looked at things and the way we approach things. And it caused change in the way we work.
Yeah.
And I just think that a lot of what we're dealing with here is what are the current beliefs? And this is part of the assessment coaching as well. It's just looking at what's biblical culture and what is our current culture. And I think this is one of the things that we need to really consider. And again, it's being able to say, you know what, I recognize that this is what I believe because this is what I've grown up with, but it's a false belief about who I am, about what I should be, and help me understand what that new belief should be, what that belief should be replaced with that represents the kingdom of God.
Wow.
I was thinking of some of the same things there, Jeff. I appreciate that, this culture. And then thinking, even as we're coming to this gathering and the people that we're working with, they're not monocultural. And some of us, we work in multicultural settings, but also just generationally, we have different cultures that are approaching these things. So as I've just did a team build with a young team, some of the things that were getting in the way, the cultural things that need to be changed, were a little different than the things that I face on my team or maybe in my generation. I think, I don't know, Mark, as we're together, if there'll be some time to maybe wrestle with that a bit, or if, obviously we're heading in the same direction, but as we look at what is it that we're needing to bring God's word to, is hope to recognize that on our teams that are mixed, in particular our churches, they might not be all coming from the same place. So we're not moving from one spot to another. I see that as a challenge. I think, what I see what we're developing here, but I do see that this is not, we're all together in a bad spot and we're all simultaneously at the same pace moving towards a good spot. I think the coaching, the leadership, the shepherding of that along is going to be a place where I think as I'm working with people, well, I could use help. How do I do that well? Because I want us to all be moving towards that, but I know we're not all moving at the same place. Maybe some of us have been believers for years. Some might be new Christians. This might be brand new type of thinking for them. So when you're talking cultural change, I was just thinking on those same levels. We've got, it's a challenge for sure, but it's not maybe the same that when we just think my culture, I need to change my culture. We've got mixes in our groups.
Yeah, Matt, Jeff, both of you on what you're talking about there, really the whole idea of turning around and swimming upstream against the current of our current society. And Matt, I appreciate the fact that you say, with young believers especially, that when they first get turned around, the current is really flowing hard against them. We could take that metaphor a long, long way, I guess. But how we as a community come alongside them also and help to bring them along is extremely important. And we do tend sometimes to be quicker to see the negative. So, many times as believers, we get branded as the people of the no's because we say no to this and no to that, and we're just constantly seem to be against things. And what we really need to do is get focused on our pastor emeritus this past Sunday preached on, held a football up, and he said, you know what? When the football players go out to play, they know what they're focused on. Vince Lombardi used to tell these professional football players before they would go out to a game, he'd hold it up and say, gentlemen, this is a football. And he's talking to professional football players, but it's like, what are we supposed to be concentrating on? What's our focus supposed to be here? And sometimes we get so focused on the negative things that we see that we forget that we really need to be focused on the positive, and we need to be presenting the positive gospel and not just what the gospel might be confronting being against. So we don't just concentrate on the current that we're swimming against. We concentrate on the swimming. What's the goal? What are we trying to get to? How are we going together to get there, right? Mark, you wanted to say something else?
Larry, I just want to say, Larry, what Matt was saying there. I mean, I remember I was coaching a First Nation, I don't know what you call it in the States, but he was a guy that had sort of like an Indian background, and he was trying to sort out what can stay and what's got to go. He reads Romans 1 and he's thinking, man, worshiping ancestors is not a great plan. And so he's culturally trying to sort that out. But I guess it's the question, what is kingdom culture? I mean, I love that about the GRIP. It gives us common language. Yeah. Because we've all got to kind of trade those baseball cards and ask, man, what's got to go here, man? Like we don't have it all figured out in the West. I mean, I think we've got some great stuff for intentionality and strategy and assessments and discipline. But I was a pastor of African people and the community down better than we do in terms of like not being individuals, understanding it does take a village appropriately to raise a child, and the African proverb in the GRIP report. And so it's interesting how it's all about like, what is kingdom culture? And I think it's very different than we as Westerners. We want them to be like us, and I don't think that's the plan at all.
Yeah.
I think it takes us back to something that John said early on, and that is my word's not his. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but that there's a cost if we push toward building a we culture. And some of you have heard me say this before. I'm convinced that, and this is more true when you have teams that are cross-cultural in nature, but it's true in a monocultural team as well. And that is that I'm convinced that until people have been broken together, they will not trust each other. Mm-hmm. And so our team build process accidentally turns out to be an amazing way to allow people the chance to face each other and share strengths, weaknesses, and needs, which lends to brokenness, which lends to allowing the Spirit of God to begin to create community. So I think this is one other critical aspect, pushing toward a we mindset or a we culture, ultimately for all of us will mean some level to a willingness to admit our brokenness. And I think that's one of the realities that we have yet to face really, really in a meaningful way, especially in the American way being about happiness and running from pain. And God's call is to brokenness. And that's the primary way I believe the Spirit actually engages and empowers community. So this discussion on culture is a big deal. And it gets back to how I see myself and my own brokenness and how I relate to others in that process.
Yeah. When we're talking about trust, building trust, and that does demand some vulnerability. And if we are not willing to be vulnerable and share from our own brokenness, then how can we build trust? And yet, if we get to the point where we are willing to do that, and if we also prove our trustworthiness as others are sharing with us, then we really can build a we value of boldness. We can be fearless. We can move forward together in a way that we never would have thought if we stayed as just an island, just an eye. Well, hey, guys, I know it's at the top of the hour, and wow, I would love to continue this conversation. Mark, thank you especially for all the work you're doing on that schedule to make sure that we do have a little bit of free time, not just to lounge around by the pool, but if we're going to lounge around by the pool, to lounge around in groups and build we in our own community as we're there together. But I hope that you'll be thinking about who you should invite to this. You can invite other people to come. Who are the people that when you talk to them about this I to we thing, when you talk to them even about being a GRIP-Birkman coach, what is this GRIP-Birkman? And how you begin to talk about, well, it's part of something bigger. It's part of this idea of moving from I to we. And then as you're talking to those people and you see their eyes lighting up, like the two guys I was talking about earlier, you see their eyes lighting up, you see them leaning into the conversation, invite them to come, give them the links, give them information. And if you need to have some questions asked, you can always write to us. You can always write to support@gripbirkman.com, and it will then get to one of us who will answer, or maybe a couple of us will answer those questions. So I hope that we'll be able to see you there, that you'll be coming and bringing some folks with you, and that this is going to be one of those events where we're going to look back years later and say, I was there. I really think this is going to be one of those kinds of meetings. So folks, thanks for everything you're doing as a GRIP-Birkman coach to build unity in the body of Christ. And we hope to see you again next month. Lord bless you all. Bye-bye now.